This is Ad Absurdum. I'm Ian McLeod, and today we're talking school capture, particularly in South Africa. My guest is a fascinating one, Richard Wilkinson. He's become, as far as my social media research goes, the go-to expert on school capture in South Africa. The hook today is that, as far as I understand things, Richard is slightly more positive than me about schools that have gone woke and their ability to pull back and be saved, if you like. I tend to be a little bit more negative, but as we chat, we'll work out if my understanding is right, and we'll see if Richard can make me a little bit more positive. I hope he can. The caveat is that Richard has applied something I haven't seen for a while. It's called journalistic ethics. I think it's an ETH. I think it's ethics, journalistic ethics. Haven't seen it for a while, but he's applying that. And we're going to give everybody the right of response. So we won't talk terribly specifically about anybody in this realm. We'll talk principles, themes, arguments. Before we start, Richard, a very big welcome to you. Thanks very much for joining me. You're an attorney. I know you went to St. Stithians, which is also my alma mater. We were just a few years apart. And I believe you're studying some accounting. What else do we need to know about you?
Yeah, I think that's all. Thanks so much for the invite and for the welcome. It's great to be here. And yeah, no, I'm a non-practicing attorney. I was an attorney at a law firm, and then I went to a Big Four auditing firm specialized in tax. And I'm currently studying to be a chartered accountant. So I've got not currently working at a firm. And yeah, and I think you've got that spot on. I think the plan is to talk about some of the recent ideological changes in the schools. And ideally, I'd like to give the schools the opportunity to give their side of the story as well in a fair way. So, I think we'll try to stick to the stuff that's actually published on the school's websites, which is pretty self-incriminating anyway. I mean, the content that a lot of these schools are putting online is pretty transparent about what has happened and what they're currently doing. So yeah, I mean, I'm 33 years old, not married, I don't have any kids, but I did go through UCT, and I was there until 2011. And so I saw the start of what I saw as being quite disturbing ideas, what today might be called wokeness. And I thought, gee, this stuff is really disturbing. I mean, we studied Foucault and Derrida in law school. And I thought, oh, sure, good thing that all the stuff about privilege and microaggressions and so on, the identity politics that gave rise to white privilege and microaggressions. Good thing that the stuff is trapped in the humanities and law faculties of UCT. And then Rhodes Must Fall happened. I was horrified by it, and it blew up, became bigger than anyone can imagine. Rhodes Must Fall became very violent and criminal, became Fees Must Fall. Next thing, we got R1 billion worth of damage and incalculable damage done to the human resources of universities in South Africa. What has subsequently happened is that a number of the alumni of the fallist movements have become very active in the schools, and they've started promoting ideas of critical race theory in schools across South Africa. And that has had a number of very negative implications, and it's caused a lot of damage to schools and a lot of harm to innocent people. And that's what I've been researching for a little while. Yeah, that's my background.
Great. Interesting. You mentioned Foucault, and I think I encountered him for the first time. I was also at UCT, but I was in the commerce faculty, and so we didn't have too much woke in my time. Yeah. Studying Rhodes studying journalism at Rhodes, I remember Foucault came into it. And I remember feeling bad because I didn't quite understand him. I didn't quite know what he was talking about. And recently listening to James
Nobody
Lindsay,
does. Yeah.
James Lindsay tells me you're not meant to. It's not meant to be understood. It's just meant to be, it's ideology rather than academia. But thank you. That sets us up, and I think we share the same concerns that woke and critical race theory and everything around it is dangerous. And so let's kick off. First question. I have some ideas, and I think we all have our own ideas. But I'd like to hear your thoughts. What is school capture?
Sure. So school capture is obviously a derivative of the term state capture, and that came from Thuli Madonsela back in, I think, 2015. She published her State of Capture report, which detailed the way in which the Gupta family had corrupted and taken control of the South African state. And we can now see the implications of that very clearly, from rail to road to electricity, right? And it's about an organization that seizes control of the government centrally. And school capture is a derivative of that. And it's not exactly the same, but there are certain aspects that are very similar. I would say that the origins of school capture can be taken back to about June 2020. George Floyd died in Minnesota in late May 2020, and that sparked the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And that spread like wildfire across the world, and it very quickly caught on in South African schools. And there was a lot of activism, students protesting against violence against Black people, which is the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And this then led to a number of allegations of racism being made against various schools. I've counted over 40 schools that have been affected by this. Typically, you'd have a social media-driven campaign that would be amplified in the traditional media. Often the broadcasting media was very involved, and they could bring a lot of pressure onto individual specific schools. And the schools who took a lot of pressure was St. Cillian's Girls College in Johannesburg, Herschel Girls School in Cape Town, and countless other schools around the country. What happened is that the schools brought in social justice consultants to help them solve this problem. And in many cases, the schools were frog-marched into issuing apologies for all of this racism, because, I mean, they were absolutely swamped with allegations. St. Cillian's had a memorandum submitted to them of 66 allegations of racism. Herschel had 300 allegations of racism made publicly against the school on Instagram. So the schools immediately issued an apology. Well, they brought in the consultants, issued an apology. And then they did two things. They brought in lawyers to investigate the allegations, and they also embarked upon a massive transformation process, which these schools have already been through multiple waves of transformation. But the transformation of 2020 was particularly strong and very much based upon the ideas of critical race theory. They transformed every aspect of the school very quickly, and in my opinion, not to the benefit of the schools, the teachers, or the pupils. The lawyers came back about 6 months later, and this is where things get interesting. At St. Cillian's, they brought in Cheadle Thompson, and Cheadle Thompson reported that none of the allegations had any substance to them, which I found very strange. And I said, okay, well, are you going to now withdraw your apology? No, they're not going to withdraw their apology. And similar things happened at various schools, one of which was St. Mary's DSG in Pretoria. There were 7 teachers who were suspended from their jobs because accusations had been made against them. They went through extensive and very stressful investigations, and frankly, the allegations all fell over, not having any substance. And that's whilst taking the most generous possible approach to the matter that really was very generous towards the complainants. At St. Cillian's, 53 of the allegations were made confidentially or anonymously, and the lawyers appealed for the anonymous complainants to come forward, and nobody came forward. So I was interested in this. I see at Herschel, they investigated the 300 incidents, and they decided that 2 or 3 staff members have now departed from the school, is the words that they use. They're effectively fired from their jobs. And I looked into the incidents, and I'm quite concerned about the validity and veracity of those incidents. I think it's quite, quite dubious. Anyway, I started investigating the activities of the transformation and diversity consulting industry, and there is such a thing. It is a rapidly growing industry. It has a number of very prominent names. And I became a bit concerned when I saw that some of the most prominent people who were making accusations of racism are actually directly connected to that industry, that is winning lucrative contracts to solve problems that frankly might not actually exist. And that raised some red flags from an ethical perspective. I then started looking into some of the abuse that has been suffered by children and by teachers. So, for example, I understand that there has been an epidemic of fake WhatsApps that have been made, where you use internet technology to create a WhatsApp that is from Ian, but it's got your profile photo and your name, but the text is completely false, fake, made up. And then you send that to the anti-racism complaints line and get children expelled from schools. There's also been the emergence of microaggressions in schools, and microaggressions is another term straight out of critical race theory.
Yep.
And people are being prosecuted for the most absurd things. For example, To Kill a Mockingbird is a book that was a prescribed set book, and the N word comes up in that book 47 times. And what's happened is that teachers often ask the girls to read in class, and the girl pronounces the word out loud, and all hell breaks loose. The teachers put on final warning. Kid leaves the school. There's huge bullying of children. And so I think things have got completely out of hand when it comes to the woke side of things. When it comes to other aspects of the schools that are being changed, the curriculum's being decolonized in a number of schools, highly racialized admissions policies, hiring policies, discipline policies have gone woke. And in my opinion, this is to the detriment of the schools. And so that really is my work on school capture. I've been researching it for quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah, that really
talk all night about it.
Jigsaws with my understanding very much the type of thing we see when we read about woke critical race theory in any context. But most concerning for me is that when it's in a school, kids are unbelievably malleable.
Absolutely.
And we all know how kids, we were all there, you catch on to hairstyles and you want to join a group. And there's good evidence, in particular in a book I mentioned in my Daily Friend article, Irretrievable Damage. There are outbreaks of alleged transgenderism where one kid comes out as transgender and it may well be genuine. We know it's a genuine thing, but then there's an outbreak because kids are malleable and they want to be special and they want to be part of a tribe, etc. And so very concerning stuff. Next question I'd like to ask you is where is this? Perhaps more specifically, is there a country? Is it America where it's starting and it's being exported?
Yeah, look, it has its origins in America. You can follow this upstream as far as you like. You end up with Karl Marx, because that's the origin of this tributary of rivers. It all flows backwards to Karl Marx. And Karl Marx obviously was a German philosopher in the 19th century, came up with a set of ideas which became known as Marxism, inspired the Russian Revolution, which led to half the world being communist for the 20th century. And Marxism went into remission in the 1990s. The Berlin Wall came down and there was great liberalization of the world, including here in South Africa. You got a left-wing party like the ANC, which is very much a Marxist organization. They also got taken by the wave of liberalization, and they did some good things in the late 90s and 2000s, which seems unthinkable to say such a thing now. But, the ANC was running budget surpluses in the early 2000s, and they were privatizing state-owned enterprises, which is why Telkom today is what it is. They obviously then regressed. And I think there's been this big regression in the last 10 or 20 years where the intellectual left has regrouped both in South Africa and around the world and is now reasserting itself. And the way they did that is by ditching the class analysis that Marx used, and they've substituted it with identity-based analysis. So instead of talking about the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, instead of talking about the upper classes and the working classes, they now talk about black and white, or male and female, or gay, or heterosexual and gay. And they've also got this idea called intersectionality, where you have different identities that intersect with each other. So I am a white heterosexual man. I'm the epitome of evil in their eyes. Whereas if you are a black female, you would be further up the oppression matrix, and therefore you are imbued with greater victimhood and therefore greater legitimacy. And this was very much a academic discussion that went on, in the humanities and law faculties. And eventually they found a way to use social media to get this to really explode out into the world. And it started in America. It's come to South Africa, very much so. Many of the leading activists and consultants in South Africa have traveled to America and have been personally trained by Robin DiAngelo and by other groups. There is a lot of American money behind it. There are American organizations that train people. And then they come back into South Africa, and they're very small in number, but they're very influential. And it really has spread out across the English-speaking world. I don't think that Europe is as badly affected as us. I don't see the Italians, tearing down the Colosseum and, telling us that Julius Caesar, should be cancelled from the history books, because the Italians haven't been infected by the same mind virus. The same with Afrikaans. I mean, the Afrikaans schools are not woke because Afrikaans schools are not part of the Anglosphere. The Anglosphere is English-speaking South Africa, the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand. And in those countries, things have, really been heavily affected. I see Eton has gone very woke, of all places. So Eton now, has embarked upon a series of reforms, and they tried to fire a teacher because he had a YouTube video that wasn't, that criticized the idea of toxic masculinity and, the usual woke stuff. And so the question isn't where is it? I think the question is where isn't it? I think it is pervasive. And there are a number of schools that have explicitly signed up to that agenda, one of which is our former schools in Scythians. They have gone very woke. St. John's College, Rodin, St. Mary's DSG, Cornwall Hill College. St. Mary's and Cornwall are the two in Pretoria, in Johannesburg. St. Scythians, St. John's, Rodin. St. Mary's Waverley, what used to be St. Mary's School for Girls. So at some point it dropped the 4 girls. It's not just St. Mary's School, because who knows if these people are girls or not. And then St. Andrew's School for Girls out in the East Rand, in Bedford View. Some of the Durban schools, St. Anne's in KZN Midlands, St. Cyprian's Herschel, and Rustenburg Girls High School in particular in Cape Town. And what you'll notice is that almost all of these schools are girls' schools, right? Some of the boys' schools got caught up by it, but it's an interesting feature of how susceptible the girls' schools are to this ideological takeover, whereas the boys' schools, will do it for 15 minutes and then go play rugby in the quad. Girls' schools will put you through 18 months of diversity training.
Yeah, that's something that's come out very strongly in the academia. In fact, that girls, when there's an outbreak, if you like, in a school of transgenderism or alleged transgenderism, girls are much more susceptible. I don't know the science about that, but that's certainly what the evidence says. And yeah, as you say, small numbers of very vocal people, that resonates with me. I think it really is driven by small numbers of very radical people who are pushing these things, and there's a majority that are too afraid to speak up because you get called sexist,
you get called racist, and you get destroyed.
Whatever. And perhaps we'll come back to microaggressions. This is something I speak about in my piece of late, which is, well, there are probably small acts of aggression or something like that, and then there are microaggressions, and small boys are going to lash out now and then. They're going to push a friend, etc. But then there's something called a microaggression, which is essentially made up. And it takes any of these actions, which might be not good, and they might need a teacher to say, "Hey, Mikey, don't push your friend." But they make them into something far more evil. They call them a name of aggression.
It's I mean, in a country with so much real aggression, it seems absurd that we should have to go and look for microaggressions. Some of the microaggressions would be, mispronouncing someone's name, which is important in South Africa. You pronounce people's names correctly, but you don't have to throw go completely berserk over it. I mean, one of the great ironies of St. Scythians is that the memorandum that they submitted to Celeste Gildari and Carl Nolte, who don't exist because the rector of the school is Celeste Gilardi and the chairman is Carl Nolte. They spelled the names wrong, Yes. And then 4 of the complaints is that the white teachers don't pronounce the names of black girls correctly. Which, it's really important that people learn how to pronounce names correctly and learn how to do the different clicks in Zulu and Xhosa. And we should encourage that, and we should really, but if you're misspelling the name of the rector, you lose the moral authority to really criticize anyone who is mispronouncing your name. And what you suddenly realize is that a lot of the stuff is performative. It's people who have realized that you can win moral legitimacy and you can win the moral high ground by assuming the status of and the posture of being a victim. So you end up with these cry bullies who, a cry bully is a mixture of a crybaby and a bully, right? I think Lionel Shriver, I think, came up with that, or someone came up with that, and it wasn't me, where you act as though you have been wronged so that you can then exact, retribution upon somebody. And so it's a very upside down and inside out world. The people who are allegedly the victims are actually the perpetrators, and the people who are supposed to be the perpetrators are actually the victims of wrongful accusations of racism or whatever. And it's very ugly and it's very destructive. And it takes quite a lot of thinking and preparation to be able to fight back against this. And some of the saddest stuff I've ever seen are teachers who are perfectly well-meaning, but who, committed some microaggression of some description, To Kill a Mockingbird or whatever. And they just go through hell. I mean, they get put through disciplinaries, and they try and get legal assistance. And, the one teacher told me, the lawyer cost 2,000 rands an hour, and after 3 hours, I'd run out of money. And so, and it just breaks my heart. These people are being fired for the most disgraceful allegations, which frankly are not shouldn't even be having a disciplinary, and it's just causing carnage.
It often takes me to, his name will come to me, but the chap who talks about people needing to be damaged to get better. He often looks at it in investments. You'll have to remind me of the term, but we need to be damaged to get better, right? And I recall doing To Kill a Mockingbird at school, and it's horrible, it's harrowing, it throws you out of your comfort zone, and you start looking around and you're thinking, well, there's a black guy in my class and a white guy, and I wonder how they feel. And you've got to, anti-fragile is the word. Anti-fragile when you get better, when you get damaged a little bit. It hurts, and then you get a bit better. And I think that needs to happen a little bit more in schools, rather than going to lawyers and people getting their feelings hurt a little bit. It's always going to happen too much somewhere, but rather than going to lawyers, get stronger when your feelings are hurt.
Yeah, or don't create a system which incentivizes people to be victims. I mean, you've got people going to some of the wealthiest, not everyone who goes to St. John's or Rodin is coming from a well-off background. But listen, if you're sitting in the chapel of any of these schools, you lose whatever your personal background, whatever the difficulties you may have in your life. In this country, you lose any claim to victimhood. So when you got a guy like Cesar for Walsh claiming to be oppressed or something, like your dad got a 13 million rand golden handshake from the SABC. You went to Oxford not on a Rhodes scholarship, you didn't get that, but you got some other scholarship. I mean, please, you got a PhD from Oxford. You don't get to come back and then claim to be oppressed. I mean, it's now time to move on and build something that people want, and then build a successful company like Elon Musk. Go build cars or something, or run a successful tourism business in South Africa. There's no end of opportunity in this country to run successful tourism businesses, or start a wine label, do something productive. But you don't get to become a professional, grievance mongerer. And unfortunately, our elite schools, and pretty soon it's going to be the public schools, are going to be valorizing and glamorizing and glorifying this behavior. And that needs to stop. I'm optimistic about it, because I think that wokeness is anti-human, fundamentally. I think that human beings are positive and productive and optimistic creatures. And I think that it takes a lot to keep humanity down. And there have been ideologies in the past, whether it be Nazism or communism or whatever, that have blanketed large parts of the world in misery, right? So a country like Russia or Eastern Europe only recently emerged from the Soviet era, and Soviet, communism lasted for the better part of a century, and tens of millions of people died. Even the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, that lasted for 12 years. But these phases of madness give way to something far more liberal and capitalist and productive. Apartheid lasted for 48 years, 46 years, 43 years, whatever it is. It's almost a bit like an ice age. The ice recedes. And I believe that most children out there are people talk about children being innocent. I believe they are innocent. I think that 7-year-old boys and girls don't care about the color of their skin, and we shouldn't be putting 7-year-olds into racial literacy classes. And if you speak to the actual kids, they're miserable in these classes. They don't enjoy it. The black kids don't enjoy it. The black parents don't understand what's going on. They don't want their kid to grow up thinking that they're a victim. The white parents don't want their kids to grow up thinking that they are evil personified because of their identity. We must be kind to everybody, but that doesn't mean that we should glamorize professional victim mongering. And I believe that there was a strong wave of wokeness in 2020, and it took its toll. But increasingly, the kids are returning to the sandpit and going back to class and learning about maths and science. And it's actually impossible to bend the world to the will of wokeness on a permanent basis, because human beings are not made for that, and they eventually just relinquish. They snap back to being what they were, which is perfectly fine, frankly, before the works came along and stuffed everything up.
Yeah, I tend to think, my sort of example on this is, you put some youngsters together and go for rugby trials, and you put some guys into the A team, B team, C team, D team, and of course, some guys are hurt. They want to be in the A's, but they're in the B's, or whatever it may be. That's how we are. We compete. But then you're in the D team and you play a season, and there's some guys from different races, and who cares?
Yeah. Well, the fall of apartheid was wonderful. It ended racial classification. And it's so weird to see the reemergence of segregation in South African schools now, where we have white ally reading groups at one school in Cape Town, or we have the Black Parents Forum at St. Mary's School in Johannesburg. The white ally reading group, they read Robin DiAngelo. That happens at St. Cyprian's. It's almost as if, I think part of the explanation might have to do with the secularization of our society. And so the word secular is basically the opposite of religious. The world the Anglosphere used to be a lot more religious. Everybody was very Christian. And Christianity gave people quite a lot of structure to their lives. It starts off with some foundational text like the Bible. And, the idea of being born a sinner is a very important part of Christianity, because you're constantly striving for redemption. And the way you get to redemption is through acknowledging that you are a sinner. And, that's the whole shtick of Christianity. And as Christianity receded, I think there was sort of a biological part of our brains or our psychology that actually requires some kind of spirituality, and requires, and I think that's what wokeness has done. And other people have written and spoken about this far more eloquently than I am right now. But what's happened is that wokeness is a religion with its foundational texts, Robin DiAngelo, Ibrahim Kendi, and the idea is that white people are born sinners, but you can achieve redemption by sort of casting aside your whiteness. And they've got their high priests, the consultants are basically priests, and they go around and deliver sermons, and we are the eternal sinners who must relinquish our whiteness to make the world a better place. It's very similar to religion. And but the thing is, it doesn't have any of the good side of Christianity. Christianity, teaches people to be kind and good neighborly, the good Samaritan, and do good stuff. And that's not wokeness. Wokeness, nothing will ever achieve redemption. If you apologize, and an apology is taken as being an acknowledgement of wrongfulness, but the apology is not accepted. It's used against you. And so the stuff, as as well as I do. I'm sure many of your viewers will as well. It's poison.
You've hit on something that takes a lot of energy for me. Is I'm very much a Dawkins man, and over some time I have been quite disparaging about religion. But in recent times, I've come to realize, become much more forgiving, and realize much more of the goodness of having a religion, and how dangerous it is when something like woke takes the mantle of religion and really produces these deities, Kendi, D'Angelo, etc. So that's, you've hit on something I puzzle over a lot.
I mean, just to quickly interrupt, I mean, there was a thing where, Dawkins in the 90s was laughing at religion and really knocking down Christianity. And there were, Dawkins's cheerleaders were, cheering him on. Now they're like, get back in the pews, everybody, get back in church. 9 o'clock on Sunday, we want you back in church. Anything to get you away from the new religion of wokeness, because whatever Christianity's faults are, we'll take them, okay? Because Christianity sort of moderated itself. They stopped, some of the more hectic stuff that was going on there, and it became a pretty sort of smoothed down religion, entirely benevolent force in almost every respect. And we'll take Christianity over wokeness anytime.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. You can see Christianity, you can see wokeness displacing Christianity in the schools. So, for example, there's I think this was our school, and happy to give them right of reply and to send them. But, our school hymn was "Be Thou My Vision," right? Be Thou My Vision, O Lord of my heart. And there are 2 lines in there. And I thy, be thou in me dwelling, and I thy, be something, and I thy true son. Be thou my father, and I thy true son. Be thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one. Well, there's a microaggression in there, which is that it's been gendered in a male way. So it's now, be thou my father, and I thy true child. Be thou in me dwelling, and I with thee one, which is great because we remove the microaggression, but the hymn no longer rhymes. Son and one rhyme, and now it's child and one. And so you can see the wokes are decolonizing religion.
Yeah.
And if you are religious, you should be concerned about this. And I've spoken to a lot of people who are concerned and not very happy about it.
It'll be fascinating if we look back on our chat here and see how many micro aggressions we've committed here.
I'm beyond redemption.
We'll be
my very existence is a microaggression.
Right.
We didn't do a land acknowledgement when we started the recording.
You're right.
We should have said, I just want to note that we're currently doing this on Zoom and cyberspace, but Zoom's, headquarters are in California, and California was expropriated from some, that's what you should be doing as well.
Right. We didn't even do pronouns.
I think America's worse than us, It's definitely worse than us.
Yeah.
I mean, America is mad. There's pure insanity there. And South Africa, I think, is just not drawn into that universe as much as the woke consultants would like us to be. And this is why I'm optimistic. I think if we expose it and we kick the consultants out of the schools and we fix the discipline policies and we stop decolonizing the curriculum and we, really push quite militantly for a colorblind but pro-poor way of transforming South Africa, where, you say that race doesn't matter, but we do care about your social and economic circumstances. I think we're pushing at an open door, because I think these guys are very manipulative, but I think they're small in number, and I think they're amplified through social media. And I think we can use the same tactics against them, and we can actually push them back, and we can take South Africa in a direction where ultimately it's the only way you can govern this country, is as a colorblind, identity blind, but pro-poor basis. And I'm trying to make a small contribution to that. I don't know how far it's going to go, but it gives my life meaning.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on the next point that I jotted down is, what can we do?
Yeah,
I think you and I are kind of doing the same thing, and we're making the argument.
I think there are two things. The first is you need to expose it, and then the second is you need to have some accountability. So I've been running a Twitter account for a year where I just post woke madness going on in South African schools, and I've made contact with a lot of people, built up a huge network of parents and teachers, and got a whole lot of content. Not sure exactly what form that'll take, but I want to, publicize that in time to come. And then I think some people need a kick in the shins, people who make false allegations in order to drive business to their consulting firm. I think that needs to be exposed. I think some of the worst abuse needs to be exposed. And I think a lot of people need written apologies, people who are falsely accused of racism, people who are, fake WhatsApps and all that sort of stuff. That needs to be exposed. It needs to be cleaned up. Then we need to put across a positive vision for the future, which I'm thinking of calling liberal justice. So instead of social justice, liberal justice, which is the whole Martin Luther King, more classical liberal approach to things, and actually try and come up with some genuine, tangible ways of making a difference, not just virtue signaling. Like how do we identify which families in a school are struggling financially? And then, other parents can help pack lunches on a rotational basis, or some kids have got parents who can't read stories to them in English. Well, maybe at break time parents can come in and volunteer to take on a 6-year-old child who comes from a non-English background and read stories to that child, so that that child can have the benefit of very important, having your parents read stories to you when you're a kid so you can learn the English language. These are tangible things that'll make a difference. Our former school, St. Stithians, does wonderful things. I mean, they've got the Tundalwazi Maths and Science Academy. Every Saturday, the campus is full of poor children. I use the word poor. I mean, all of them are black, but I think race needs to take a backseat now for social and economic background. So have poor kids come in, let's try and expand the brilliant resources of St. Stithians to encompass more people. Let's do important work with stamping out bullying of gay people, which is unacceptable and I think was a reality in our day. I remember, some of the kids who were clearly gay having a bit of a hard time. A lot of good things that we can do. So first, step one is expose the nonsense. Step two is take action through public advocacy. And I think that means writing letters to schools and getting them to withdraw their discipline policy, get them to commit to no longer decolonize the curriculum and so on. And that's going to require activism and mobilization of teachers and parents. I want to establish a legal center that can represent people who are defamed, who suffer defamation, people who are going through disciplinary processes, etc. I think that's the place to start, and I think it will develop a lot of momentum quite quickly.
You hit on one of the keys for me, balance, and that we need to acknowledge. You mentioned something back, certainly in my day, when anything feminine, we were free to make fun of, and I think guys are a bit more welcoming these days. And I think that the solution to that wasn't any of the woke things, telling people they're doing microaggressions. It was a gradual progression, learning, etc. And then you mentioned being a bit positive about the future. And I think going back to our start, you have made me slightly more positive. There's always hope, and we can improve these things.
That LGBT angle is interesting. I mean, Douglas Murray, I think, is gay. There are a lot of gay people out there who aren't fans of the woke agenda, taking over the gay rights campaign. I mean, the gay rights campaign did really important stuff in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. I think they achieved victory in the Western world, not everywhere else, but in the Western world, I think they sort of could declare victory, pack up, go home. And suddenly there are a lot of people thinking, oh, but what about, the struggle must continue. And it morphed into wokeness. And so now you've got this fetishization of LGBT identities. I mean, you'll know the school, it's our school, recently announced that they were taking on a transgender student into the girls' school. He's currently at the boys' school. He's going to move across to the girls' school. That's fine. But I don't know why we have to publish a newsletter and put this guy on a pedestal in the spotlight. That can't be easy, you know. And it's being done, I think, to virtue signal. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's, I don't think that LGBT people want to be the focus of other people's campaigns.
Yeah, we go to, let's take the lens of the individual. Is it is it in the best interests of this biological boy who's now a transgender girl moving from the boys' school to the girls' school? Is it in this child's best interest to have a big newsletter? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. And you know, I was concerned about the school saying that they're going to desegregate the toilets, right, so that you wouldn't have boys and girls toilets, you just have toilets, because transgender people might feel uncomfortable using a toilet that was segregated by sex or gender. And I then clarified with them that actually they were creating like a third type of gender neutral toilets, which is fine. I mean, that's what happens in some restaurants, you know. If there's only one toilet, it's gender neutral. It's not the end of the world. And so they've got sort of gender neutral toilets now. But the way they sort of communicated it in their initial newsletter was, we're getting rid of male and female toilets. It's like, this is madness, because you need to, there's a reason we have male and female toilets, and there's a reason why we have male and female sports, and there's a reason why we have male and female changing areas. So if you're an 8-year-old girl in grade 2 and it's time for swimming, in physical PE or something, or afternoon swimming lessons, you go up to the swimming pool, you get changed into your costume, you go swim. Those kids absolutely should be changing in a room that only has 8-year-old girls in it. Not having, you know, teenage boys wandering through. It's just completely inappropriate. And I think it's important that we don't desegregate the toilets. I think I'm speaking on behalf of 99.9% of people who can understand a common sense policy when they see one. I remember at UCT when people went around tearing down the male and female signs on the toilets. I thought it was madness. The madness is multiplying. The madness of crowds, as Douglas Murray would call it.
Right. I'm also a big fan of Douglas and his latest book. I've just finished listening to The War on the West. Also
really?
more sage insights from him.
Did you buy the audiobook?
Yeah.
Okay, because I've heard from people they can't find it at exclusive books, and Amazon will take like months to ship it. So yeah. I guess I need to go onto Audible and download the audiobook.
The benefit of that is that you get it beautifully read by Douglas himself, which incomparable. But I think these days you want the physical book for many reasons.
Because I like highlighting this stuff, and if you've only heard it and you haven't highlighted it and made notes in the margin, it's very difficult 3 months later to recall exactly what page that brilliant idea was on. So I almost want to do both, because I have a collection of books that I've never read, even though I really want to read them, but I just get too distracted. So Audible books are good because you can listen to them in the car, or you can listen to them when you want to go to sleep at night or something. So I want to get both. I think I'll start with the Audible book, and then I will buy the book and read it a second time, so I can get the most out of it. I see.
I think that's ideal. I find if I listen to a book out jogging or driving the car, you miss some stuff. It's great to get the broad take.
He's brilliant.
And then you get your Amazon deleting books, which is, perhaps we'll have a chat about that another time.
Is Amazon deleting books now?
Look, I'm thinking back to Dr. Seuss being censored. I think they've been taken off Amazon here and there, but
yeah.
Anyway, looking a little bit ahead, do you think we can look forward to anything? Perhaps let's take the next year, 18 months. Anything to look forward to? Do you think there will be a pushback? any people or actions we should look forward to on this issue?
Yeah, not to punt my own project, but yeah, I'm going to do a lot of stuff. I haven't confirmed anything, but I'm working on it, and you'll be the first to know. I think the tide is turning. I think that there's been a lot of noise that's been made by a lot of people. If you said the word woke to people, I think more people now understand it than they did 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I think people get it. I think the traditional media, which has been a source of a lot of the wokeness, is collapsing. I mean, Iqbal Survey's newspapers collapsed years ago, but they are in a greater state of collapse today than they were in 10 or 5 years ago. Eusebius McKay's is off the radio. Jesus, still on Twitter. And so on. I think there's just a pushback, and I think the market is showing people that people don't want what the product that's being offered.
Yeah.
Schools out there, I'm happy to get their take on it, so I don't misrepresent them. But Herschel apparently struggling to fill their seats in their classes. St Mary's DSG in Pretoria lost 100 girls, left a 12.5 million rand hole in their income statement. Go woke, go broke. Disney, Netflix, they're all down massively. I think that cumulative, I think it's a phase that we're going to grow out of. I sincerely hope so. I hope what takes its place is going to be something that is respectful and classically liberal, and that we don't have some kind of crazy malevolent force in the opposite direction that rolls back gay rights or bullies people. I don't want that.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to be fine. And this, because at the end of the day, I mean, people have been through hell. They've been through the Holocaust or the Holodomor or starvation, or and we live in comparatively peaceful and prosperous times. And as annoying as wokeness is, it's not as bad as that other stuff. And wokeness may still lead to real harm being caused, and it could get worse before it gets better. But I think it's an era of our times that we're gradually growing out of. More and more people are developing the confidence and the skill necessary to speak out against it. And what I've found is that if one person stands up and speaks out, you then have more and more people standing up and speaking out. So I think let's have this conversation again in a year, and I'll let you know whether I still feel optimistic, or I can say, geez, I did a shitload of activism and got nowhere and got cancelled, and now I'm living, under a bridge somewhere with a computer that doesn't work because Amazon and Apple have also cancelled me. So I'm speaking to you on a public payphone under a bridge in Braamfontein, and those schools are as woke as ever. I'll let you know which way it goes, but I think we're going to be fine.
Well, let's do it again. Let's pencil that in and see how things go. I think you touched on the thing that gives me the most hope, which is free markets. I'm an Austrian school economist, and I think the free markets in the end decide. It's the go woke, go broke. People don't buy things if they essentially tell you you're terrible, if they tell you if you don't think a man can get pregnant, you're bad. They don't.
Who would have thought that would be a bad marketing strategy, guilt tripping people over their race? Yeah, that'll get a lot of people to buy your stuff. I mean, that's just so stupid.
And the markets aren't perfect, but I think they tend to do better. In fact, they almost always do better than somebody centrally who thinks they can decide, and somebody who has a PhD in grievance studies deciding what children should study and think at school.
See, the thing is,
that's really covered my questions, but I'm sure we've touched on things where you'd like to elaborate. Anything that's just biting on your mind you'd like to finish off?
Let's have a look at the list of questions that what are the dangers of letting it continue, or what can people like us do? The dangers of letting this continue, I think, are really self-evident and really concerning. I think there's a lot of psychological damage that's going to be done. I think what's going to happen is these kids are going to move out into the world, the real world. They won't for a while because they're going to go to university, which is not the real world, and is increasingly just an extension of school and they're going to, have another 4 years of grievance studies. But what's interesting is the kids are seeing through this. I mean, there are a bunch of 12-year-olds who have spoken to their parents, and the parents have spoken to me, and the kids are like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
And the kids are going to go to university and have more of it. And it's going to, I think we actually sort of a bit like a virus developing antibodies in your body. I think the more you're exposed to the virus, the more you see it and understand it and actually become acclimatized to it. And these kids are eventually going to get into the real world where you suddenly realize that nobody cares about any of this stuff. And what people care about in the real world is, can you make something that they want, and which you give to them in exchange for money? Maybe you make chairs or tables, or you give legal advice, or whatever it is that you're doing, whatever your contribution is to this planet. And if you can make something that enough people want, and they give you money and you make a margin on it, you will prosper. Otherwise you won't. And that's the secret to life. And all of this stuff is completely irrelevant to that. And I hope that as people encounter the real world, I mean, I was a bit of a woke lefty back in 2007. I think I joined the ANC when I left Sicilians. And then you experience the real world and you have a bit of a jolt. And I hope what we end up with is a group of people who are more ideological than perhaps our generation was. We grew up in peace and prosperity after apartheid, before the current era, which I think is not as nice as the 2000s were. And maybe we didn't have the same ideological grounding that you can only get if you've been through woke indoctrination, or if you've been through some real hardship out there in the world. And you really come to appreciate the importance of identity blindness, classical liberalism, capitalism. I think that's where we're heading, and I'm optimistic that we can push back, but it's just going to need more and more people to speak up, which is why I'm grateful for you, doing what you're doing, and for having me on tonight, because it's just another important drop that builds towards a torrent, and hopefully we can push back the tide of wokeness with the opposite.
Well, I think that's a great way to finish. Woke is bad, it's dangerous, but it might just be, there may be a positive outcome in that it's so bad and so outrageous that the generation going through it will say, you know what, this is madness. We're going to do something better.
Yeah, well, here's a quote from Margaret Thatcher, because ultimately, human psychology doesn't change generation from generation, which is why communism is so alluring and why Marxism is so persistent despite being such a horrific failure. Margaret Thatcher said, "Communism never sleeps, never changes its objectives, nor must we. Our first duty to freedom is to defend our own freedom. Then one day we might export a little freedom to those people who have to live without it." And I think that's where we need to start. I mean, these schools are so keen on training up their kids to make the world a better place. I think we need to start by actually defending our own freedom inside the walls of the school. And once we breed up a new generation of people who understand liberty and who appreciate freedom, then I think we've got a chance of exporting freedom to the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
Richard, I couldn't say it better. This has been the first Ad Absurdum podcast.
What an honor for me.
Thank you very much for joining me. And let's hope, let's work on keeping, as you say, exporting freedom if we can. Yeah,
I'm keen, man. Check you next year and I'll tell you how it's gone.
Let's do it in a year's time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ian. Cheers, man. Bye.
Bye.